Washington, D.C., June 1942. Past midnight. A woman stands naked in the arms of a Vichy French diplomat inside his own embassy. Guards patrol the hallways. In the next room, a safecracker photographs naval ciphers that have eluded Allied intelligence for months. When a security guard opens the door, he finds only two lovers in an embarrassing embrace. He apologizes and retreats. The ciphers are copied. The woman slips into the night carrying secrets that will help launch the invasion of North Africa. Her codename was Cynthia. Her weapon was seduction. For 6 years, she moved through embassies and bedrooms across 3 continents, stealing codes from men who believed she loved them. Italian naval ciphers, German cipher machine intelligence, French naval codes. This is the story of MI6's most effective honey trap operative. The woman who proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon in espionage is knowing exactly what men want to hear. Understanding Cynthia requires understanding the world that made her necessary. By the mid-1930s, British intelligence faced a problem it could not solve through conventional means. Hitler was rising. Mussolini was consolidating power. Europe was sliding toward war, and MI6 was flying blind. The service had diplomatic cover in embassies across the continent, but diplomats saw only what foreign governments wanted them to see. The secrets that mattered, military plans, naval codes, strategic intentions, lived in safes and filing cabinets and the minds of men who would never share them in official meetings. Traditional espionage could recruit agents, bribe officials, intercept communications. But the most sensitive intelligence often resided in places that money and ideology could not reach. Private offices, bedrooms, the unguarded moments when powerful men spoke freely to people they trusted completely. Intelligence services had always understood that sex could open doors that remained closed to other methods. The honey trap was as old as espionage itself, but deploying it systematically required a specific type of operative. Someone beautiful enough to attract targets, intelligent enough to extract information without arousing suspicion, socially skilled enough to move through elite circles, and morally flexible enough to manufacture intimacy for operational purposes without hesitation or guilt. Such people were rare. Training them was delicate. Using them raised questions that intelligence services preferred not to answer publicly. But when the method worked, it worked extraordinarily well. In the late 1930s, British intelligence identified a woman with unusual potential. She was American-born but married to a British diplomat, giving her access to embassy circles across European capitals. She was beautiful and charming and utterly without conventional scruples about fidelity. She had already demonstrated a willingness to use romantic relationships to access sensitive information, passing intelligence to British contacts without formal recruitment. Her name was Amy Elizabeth Thorpe. MI6 would call her Cynthia. Understanding the operative requires understanding the woman who became her. Amy Elizabeth Thorpe was born in Minneapolis in 1910 to a family that expected great things from its children. Her father was a Marine Corps officer who instilled discipline and patriotism. Her mother came from wealth and taught her the social graces expected of women in their class. She attended elite schools, learned languages, and mastered the art of moving through rooms full of powerful people as though she belonged there. From adolescence, she displayed the traits that would define her career. She was strikingly beautiful, with blonde hair and sharp features that drew attention wherever she went. She was intelligent and quick, able to read people and situations with unusual clarity. And she possessed something rarer still, a complete indifference to conventional morality regarding relationships, fidelity, and the use of her beauty to get what she wanted. By her late teens, she had learned that men would give her things: attention, access, information, favors. All she had to do was make them believe she found them fascinating. The transaction felt natural to her in ways it did not for other women. She felt no guilt about using attraction as currency. In 1930, at 19 years old, she married Arthur Pack, a British diplomat nearly twice her age. The marriage offered everything she needed: social status, access to embassy circles across the world, freedom to travel and move through elite society. What it did not offer was fidelity. She began affairs almost immediately, treating them as entertainment and opportunity rather than betrayal. Arthur Pack either did not know or chose not to see. The postings followed diplomatic rhythms: Santiago, Warsaw, Madrid. At each station, Betty Pack inserted herself into local high society, cultivating relationships with officials, military officers, and intelligence personnel from multiple nations. In Warsaw during the mid-1930s, she began an affair with a Polish foreign ministry official who had access to sensitive intelligence about German military preparations and Polish cryptographic work. Through careful questioning disguised as pillow talk, she extracted information about Nazi intentions and the Polish efforts to break German ciphers. She passed what she learned to British contacts at the embassy, not yet as a formal agent, simply as a well-connected source who happened to share interesting things she had heard. British intelligence noticed a woman with her access, her skills, and her apparent lack of conscience was exactly what they needed. The weapon was ready. Now it required proper deployment. The recruitment was quiet and professional. British intelligence approached her through diplomatic channels in the late 1930s as the shadow of war lengthened across Europe. She was vetted, interviewed, and assessed by officers who recognized that her value lay not in technical tradecraft, but in something far rarer. She knew how to make men want her. She knew how to make them trust her. And she knew how to make them talk. They gave her training nonetheless. Dead drops, secure communication protocols, surveillance detection, cover maintenance, the mechanics of espionage that every operative needed to survive. But her handlers understood that her primary weapon required no instruction. She had been perfecting it since adolescence. Her first formal assignment targeted the Italian embassy in Warsaw. Italy under Mussolini was allied with Germany, and Italian military plans and naval codes were intelligence priorities. The target was Alberto Lais, the Italian naval attaché stationed in Warsaw. He had access to exactly the information Britain needed: fleet dispositions, communication protocols, strategic planning documents. The assignment was simple in concept: get close, get access, get the codes. She maintained her cover as a diplomat's wife, socially active and politically naive. The affair with Lais developed over weeks, following patterns she understood instinctively. She engineered encounters at diplomatic functions. She expressed interest in Italian culture, in his work, in him. She made herself available without appearing eager. She created opportunities for intimacy while allowing him to believe he was the pursuer. Lais fell exactly as her handlers expected. Like many men who encountered Betty Pack, he believed her attention was genuine, that she found him specifically fascinating, that their connection transcended the ordinary calculations of embassy life. The belief made him careless in ways that training should have prevented. The relationship gave her access to his residence, his routines, his confidence. She photographed documents during visits to his quarters. She memorized details from conversations conducted in the unguarded moments after intimacy. She extracted information about Italian naval operations, fleet movements, and communication systems. The intelligence she provided helped British naval planners understand Italian capabilities months before the war began. Her reports were specific, actionable, and accurate. Her first major operation as a formal MI6 asset was a complete success. The amateur had become a professional. The proof of concept was established. But Italy was only the beginning. The war would demand much more. By September 1939, war had engulfed Europe. Germany had invaded Poland. Britain and France had declared war. Italy remained officially neutral, but everyone understood where Mussolini's loyalties lay. It was only a matter of time before Italian forces joined the Axis powers, and when they did, the Mediterranean would become a contested battleground. British naval intelligence needed Italian codes desperately. The Mediterranean was a lifeline connecting Britain to its empire in the east. to oil supplies, to military reinforcements from Egypt and India. Italian submarines and surface vessels threatened that lifeline. Understanding their movements, anticipating their operations, required breaking their communications. Alberto Lais had been promoted and transferred, but the affair continued. Betty Pack followed his movements, maintaining contact across postings, nurturing the relationship her handlers considered too valuable to abandon. By 1940, she was operating under closer MI6 direction with a specific objective: the Italian naval cipher systems themselves. The seduction had already established the foundation. Lais believed completely that she loved him. He had no suspicion that the beautiful woman who sought his company was anything other than what she appeared: a diplomat's wife, lonely and sophisticated, who found in him something her husband could not provide. She exploited his ego with precision. She asked about his work in ways that seemed innocent. What pressures did he face? What frustrated him? What achievements was he proud of? He talked because men always talked when beautiful women showed interest in their importance. The intimacy she provided created a space where professional caution dissolved. He shared details he should have protected: operational matters, communication protocols, the systems that secured Italian naval traffic. The affair gave her physical access to his private quarters. She learned his routines, when he slept most heavily, when he was away from his residence, where he kept sensitive materials. On multiple occasions, while he slept in the next room exhausted from their encounters, she photographed documents he had brought home from the embassy. The Italian naval ciphers she obtained were transmitted to London. British cryptanalysts used them to break Italian communications with increasing success. By the time Italy entered the war in June 1940, British naval intelligence had a decisive advantage in the Mediterranean. The results were measured in ships sunk and lives taken. At the Battle of Cape Matapan in March 1941, British commanders read Italian orders in near real time. They knew where the Italian fleet was sailing. They positioned forces accordingly. 3 Italian heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers were destroyed. Over 2,300 Italian sailors died in the engagement. The intelligence that made this possible traced back, in part, to documents photographed in an attaché's bedroom while he slept. The Italian operation proved what MI6 had suspected. A skilled operative using seduction could obtain intelligence that no other method could reach. Betty Pack had demonstrated her value beyond question. Her handlers began planning something larger. By 1941, Betty Pack's usefulness in Europe was ending. Too many affairs in too many embassies. Too many whispered suspicions among diplomatic circles. The cover that protected her was wearing thin. Her handlers recognized that continued operations on the continent risked exposure that could compromise not just her, but the networks she had helped build. They transferred her to America. British security coordination operated out of Rockefeller Center in New York, running intelligence operations across the Western Hemisphere. BSC worked to bring the United States into the war, to counter Axis influence in Latin America, and to gather intelligence on enemy activities throughout the Americas. It was a sprawling operation with hundreds of agents and assets conducting everything from propaganda campaigns to covert operations. Betty Pack arrived in Washington under a new identity, ready for her most important assignment. The target was the Vichy French embassy. After France fell in 1940, a collaborationist government under Marshal Pétain had taken control of unoccupied France and the French colonial empire. Vichy France was technically neutral, but cooperated extensively with Nazi Germany. The Vichy embassy in Washington maintained diplomatic relations with the United States while handling communications with French territories across Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. Those communications were protected by French naval ciphers that Allied cryptanalysts had been unable to break. The codes secured traffic between Vichy officials and their colonial administrators, including detailed information about military dispositions, coastal defences, and political conditions in French North Africa. Allied planners needed that information desperately. They were developing Operation Torch, The invasion of French North Africa scheduled for November 1942. American and British forces would land in Morocco and Algeria, territories controlled by Vichy France. The operation would be the first major Allied offensive against Hitler's fortress Europe. Success depended on understanding what resistance they would face. The naval ciphers locked inside the Vichy embassy could tell them everything. The target within the embassy was Charles Bruce, the press attaché. He was married, middle-aged, and possessed of the particular vanity that made men susceptible to the attention of beautiful women. More importantly, he had access to the embassy's secure areas and understood its communication systems. He was not the most senior official, but he was positioned to provide exactly what the operation required. Betty Pack manufactured an introduction through Washington's social channels. She presented herself as a journalist interested in the French perspective on the war. She was charming, curious, and attentive. The affair began within weeks. Bruce, like liars before him, believed her interest was genuine. He saw a beautiful woman, fascinated by him, specifically, not an intelligence operative methodically building access to his workplace. She cultivated him, slowly, building trust, establishing patterns, preparing for the extraction operation that would require far more than seduction alone. The affair gave her access to Bruce, but Bruce alone could not deliver the ciphers. The naval codes were stored in a secure room within the embassy, locked in a safe with a combination known only to senior officials. Bruce had access to the building after hours. He did not have access to the safe itself. British security coordination recognized that the operation would require more than seduction. They brought in a professional safecracker from Canada, a specialist whose identity remains classified but whose skills were precisely suited to the task. The plan required Betty Pack to get the team inside the embassy while the safecracker opened the safe and photographed the cipher books. The first challenge was establishing a pattern that would not arouse suspicion. Betty convinced Bruce to bring her into the embassy at night, framing it as a romantic adventure. The thrill of an affair conducted inside his own workplace appealed to his vanity. They began meeting regularly after hours, arriving late and leaving before dawn. The night guards grew accustomed to seeing them. A senior diplomat conducting a discreet affair was hardly unusual. The guards learned to look away. The first attempt at the safe failed. In late May 1942, the safecracker entered through a window while Betty and Bruce occupied a room near the front of the building. He reached the cipher room but could not defeat the combination lock in the time available. He needed either the combination itself or additional hours to work. Neither was immediately available. Betty worked Bruce for more. Could he discover the combination? Could he extend their time inside? She pushed carefully, maintaining the fiction of romance while extracting operational details about embassy security procedures. Through separate intelligence channels, BSC obtained the safe combination from a source whose identity has never been revealed. The second attempt was scheduled for the night of June 19, 1942. Betty and Bruce entered the embassy after midnight, following their established routine. The night guard noted their arrival without concern. They proceeded to a room near the ambassador's office where they had met before. The safecracker entered through a rear window minutes later, equipped with the combination and a miniature camera. He worked in near darkness, navigating corridors he had studied from building plans. He reached the cipher room, opened the safe, and began photographing the naval codebooks page by page. The process was painstaking. Each page had to be positioned, illuminated, and captured without blur. The work took hours. Shortly before completion, a night guard made an unscheduled round. He approached the room where Betty and Bruce waited. Hearing footsteps, Betty made a decision that would become legendary in intelligence circles. She and Bruce stripped off their clothes. When the guard opened the door, he found them naked, apparently interrupted in an intimate moment. Betty made no effort to cover herself. She simply looked at him with the indignation of a woman whose privacy had been violated. The guard, mortified, apologized profusely and retreated. He did not return. The safecracker finished his work undisturbed. The cipher books were returned to the safe. The safe was closed. By dawn, Betty and Bruce left the embassy as they had entered, two lovers concluding an illicit night. The film reached BSC handlers within hours. Within weeks, Allied cryptanalysts were reading Vichy French naval communications. The operation was a complete success. The ciphers reached London through secure channels and were immediately prioritized for cryptanalytic work. Within weeks, British and American intelligence services were reading Vichy French naval communications with increasing fluency. The codes that had resisted breaking for months now yielded their secrets. Traffic between Vichy officials and their colonial administrators flowed through Allied analysis centers, revealing exactly what Operation Torch planners needed to know. On November 8, 1942, Allied forces launched the invasion of French North Africa. Over 100,000 American and British troops came ashore at beaches across Morocco and Algeria in the largest amphibious operation the world had yet seen. 3 task forces landed simultaneously at Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers, supported by hundreds of naval vessels and thousands of aircraft. The intelligence derived from the Vichy French ciphers had shaped every element of the planning. Allied commanders knew the disposition of French naval forces along the coast. They understood which ports were heavily defended and which were vulnerable. They had read communications between Vichy administrators discussing the political mood in the colonies, the reliability of military units, and the likelihood of resistance to an Allied landing. The knowledge proved decisive. Vichy French forces resisted initially, as expected. Coastal batteries fired on landing craft. Naval vessels engaged Allied ships, but the resistance was uneven and quickly collapsed. Within 3 days, Vichy commanders in Algeria had agreed to a ceasefire. Morocco followed shortly after. The operation secured the entire North African coastline in less than a week. American casualties were far lower than planners had projected. The intelligence advantage had allowed commanders to concentrate forces where defenses were weakest and avoid positions where resistance would be strongest. Men who might have died on fortified beaches lived because Allied planners knew what awaited them. From North Africa, the Allies launched the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, and then the Italian mainland in September. The Mediterranean, which had been contested water for 3 years, became an Allied lake. The path to liberating Europe had been opened. Intelligence professionals assessed the Vichy French ciphers as a critical contribution to Torch's success. The photographs extracted from the Washington embassy were cited in post-war evaluations as among the most valuable single intelligence coups of the war. A seduction operation conducted in a foreign embassy on American soil had helped launch the invasion that began the end of Nazi Europe. Beyond Torch, the cumulative intelligence from Betty Pack's operations influenced Allied strategy throughout the conflict. Her Italian cipher work had contributed to Mediterranean naval superiority. Her Polish contacts in the 1930s had provided early intelligence on German encryption systems. Across multiple operations spanning half a decade, she had demonstrated that human intelligence obtained through seduction could achieve results that technical collection and conventional espionage could not match. She had delivered everything British intelligence asked of her. The results were measured in battles won and lives saved. When the war ended, Betty Pack's operational career ended with it. The skills that had made her invaluable during wartime had no peacetime application. Seducing enemy diplomats for intelligence purposes was not a profession that continued into the post-war world. The intelligence services that had deployed her moved on to new threats and new methods. The Cold War required different tools. She was 45 years old, twice divorced. Her marriage to Arthur Pack had dissolved years earlier, another casualty of a life spent in other men's beds for purposes her husband could never know. She possessed a history she could never publicly discuss, and skills she could never officially acknowledge. The woman who had helped win the war returned to civilian life with nothing to show for it, except secrets she was forbidden to share. But something unexpected had emerged from her final operation. Her relationship with Charles Bruce had become genuine. The affair that began as an intelligence assignment had evolved into something neither of them anticipated. After the war, they married. The man she had seduced to steal French naval ciphers became her third and final husband. They purchased a chateau in the south of France and retreated from the world of espionage entirely. Whether Bruce ever fully understood how their relationship began remains unclear. He knew she had worked for British intelligence. How much he knew about the specifics of her assignment to seduce him has never been established. Perhaps he accepted the past as the price of the present. Perhaps he preferred not to know. Betty Pack spent her remaining years in relative obscurity. She gave occasional interviews to researchers and journalists who had heard rumors of her wartime activities, speaking carefully about operations that remained classified. She expressed no regret for her methods. She had done what her country asked, and it had worked. She died of cancer in 1963, aged 53. The weapon had been retired. The woman faded quietly from history. Her story became public only after her death. In 1963, journalist H. Montgomery Hyde published a biography based on her personal papers and interviews conducted during her final years. The book revealed operations that had remained classified for 2 decades and transformed Betty Pack into a legend. The spy who weaponized seduction. The woman who slept her way to secrets that helped win the war. Her career raises questions that intelligence services still debate. Is it ethical to use sex as an operational tool? To manufacture intimacy for intelligence purposes? The men she seduced believed themselves loved. They were deceived at the most intimate level possible. Some faced professional ruin when the truth emerged. Others lived out their lives never knowing that the passion they remembered had been performance. The operational justification is straightforward. Her targets were not innocents. Alberto Lais served fascist Italy. Charles Bruce served a regime collaborating with Nazi Germany. The intelligence she obtained saved Allied lives and helped defeat fascism. From this perspective, seduction was simply another weapon in an arsenal deployed against enemies who would have shown no mercy had they prevailed. What it cost Betty Pack herself is harder to measure. She spent years feigning love with men she was using for purposes she could never acknowledge. The emotional labor of sustained deception in romantic relationships leaves marks that do not appear in operational files. Whether she paid a psychological price, or whether she was simply suited to work that would have damaged others, remains unknown. She never expressed regret. She never apologized. What she accomplished is beyond dispute. Betty Pack proved that human intelligence obtained through seduction could achieve strategic results that no other method could match. Her operations influenced the course of World War II. The ciphers she stole contributed to Allied victories that shaped the modern world. She was MI6's most effective honey trap operative. What she built with her particular weapon endured in the intelligence victories that followed. If this story of seduction, espionage, and the unconventional weapons of secret war fascinated you, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss when we investigate the operations that shaped history. Drop a like if this deep dive into tradecraft was worth your time. And here is your question for the comments. Was Betty Pack a patriot who used the tools available to her, or did her methods cross ethical lines that results alone cannot justify? Let us hear your perspective below.